What if I told you that the huge economic challenge facing the United States right now is basically a problem that's 2,000 years old? It sounds crazy, but we're going to connect the dots between the Roman Empire and modern America to understand a concept that could, well, redefine our whole financial future.
$38 trillion. Just let that number sit there for a second. That's the projected U.S. national debt at the start of 2026. It's a number so big it almost feels fake, but believe me, it is the anchor of our entire story today.
So let's rewind. 2 millennia ago, the Roman Empire had a big problem. They had massive bills to pay, but nobody wanted to pay more taxes. Sound familiar? Their solution was something called debasement. They would literally shave a little bit of silver off their coins to make new ones. Now, obviously the US isn't shaving quarters, but some economists are worried we're getting close to a modern version of this called fiscal dominance. The tools have changed, for sure, but the basic problem is exactly the same.
So what exactly is this thing, fiscal dominance? To really get a handle on it, we're going to use a really simple but powerful metaphor. All you need to picture is a car, its brake, and a trailer that is just way too heavy.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. This isn't some fringe idea cooked up on the internet. That's a direct quote from Janet Yellen, the former chair of the Federal Reserve and now the Treasury Secretary. When someone like that says the warning lights are flashing, you gotta pay attention.
So let's put a clear definition on it. Fiscal dominance is the tipping point. It's when a country's debt gets so massive that the government's need to borrow money basically ties the hands of the central bank. The Fed can't do its #1 job anymore, which is fighting inflation.
Okay, let's really get into this car analogy. Picture the U.S. economy as a car. The Treasury Department is the driver, and they've got their foot on the gas. That's all the government spending. The Federal Reserve, that's the brake. Its job is to cool things down when they get too hot by raising interest rates. But here's the twist. That car is now towing a $38 trillion trailer. That's our national debt. So, what happens if the Fed slams on the brakes to fight inflation? Well, the sheer weight of that trailer threatens to jackknife the whole rig. The government's interest payments would become impossible to manage. So, to avoid a total crash, the Fed has to ease up on the brake, even if the car is still speeding up, and that just lets inflation run wild.
This isn't just a mechanical problem of numbers and interest rates. It's also a psychological one. The whole way we think and talk about government debt has totally changed, breaking away from a core idea that really held this country together for most of its history.
For centuries, America operated under something called the Hamilton norm. Yeah, named after that Hamilton. It's a pretty simple idea. Government debt is a loan. Any money we borrow today will eventually be paid back by future generations through taxes. It's that simple promise that was the bedrock of America's financial credibility.
But just look at how things have shifted. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Obama administration, they made a big deal about promising to cut the deficit. They were reinforcing that old idea that this debt was just a temporary loan. Okay, now fast forward to 2020. Those pandemic stimulus checks, they were talked about in a totally different way. They weren't a loan you'd have to repay. They were a gift, straight from the government. And that was a huge, fundamental change. And former Fed economist Eric Leeper just nails the psychology here. He points out that the second president started putting their names on those checks, it sent a really powerful message. This is a gift, not a loan. And when people stop believing they'll ever have to pay the money back, what do? They spend it. And that just pours gasoline on the inflation fire.
Okay, so this leads us to the most mind-bending part of this whole situation. It's a paradox where the one tool we have to slow down the economy might actually be doing the exact opposite. It might be speeding it up.
And this slide just perfectly shows why today is so different. Back in the 80s, when Fed Chair Paul Volcker famously crushed inflation with high interest rates, our national debt was just about 25% of GDP. Pretty manageable. Today, we're heading towards a staggering 120%. The scale of the problem is just in a totally different universe.
So that's the million-dollar, or I guess trillion-dollar question, right? Why was that brake so effective for Volcker, but it's at risk of failing today? It's the same tool, but the car it's attached to is, well, it's a completely different vehicle.
And here is the absolute crucial difference. Because our debt, that giant trailer we're towing, is so massive, raising interest rates now means the government has to pay out over $1 trillion a year, just in interest. And where does that $1 trillion go? It goes right back into the economy, to the people and the companies and the countries that hold U.S. debt. It's like a giant stimulus check. So the Fed's brake, raising interest rates, is now acting like an accelerator, pumping more cash into the system and fueling the very inflation it's supposed to be fighting.
It's an incredible paradox.
Look, this isn't just some abstract theory for economists to argue about. It has real, tangible consequences for your wallet, for my wallet. Let's talk about what this means for you.
Economist Heather Long puts it so bluntly. As our debt-to-GDP ratio blows past that 120% mark, the power starts to shift. It's not just about what the Fed or Congress wants anymore. The bond market, the giant pool of investors who actually lend money to the U.S., they become the new king.
So how does this new king rule your life? Well, if these big investors start to get nervous, if they stop believing in that old Hamilton norm, they're going to start demanding more money to lend to us. They'll demand a term premium. That's just extra interest to cover their risk. And when that happens, it means higher mortgage rates for you, more expensive car loans for you, higher borrowing costs for pretty much everyone. The market starts setting the price of money, not our central bank.
So to put it as simply as possible, our collective belief that America will get its finances in order is what keeps our borrowing costs down. The moment that belief starts to crack, the market takes over, and every single one of us pays the price.
There's that old saying, often attributed to Churchill, that America always does the right thing after it's tried everything else. When you look at this situation, a 2,000-year-old problem showing up in this bizarre, new, paradoxical way, it leaves you with a pretty critical question to think about. Have we finally exhausted all the other options? And what in the world is left to do?